The story of the brutal of Inanimates. Creaking sounds can be heard coming from pressure inside an enormous boulder. Sounds of cracking echo to the surface of the smooth, colossal stone. Blue and white light flickers off the smooth, gargantuan rock from plasmic beings that surround the giant boulder, monopolists of inorganic life. On an ancient but still habitable planet, on a hillside covered in orange grass, a ritual is being performed by plasma imperials. Plasma imperials hum and sometimes crackle like power lines from the electromagnetic fields holding their figures together. Looking like flaming liquid, blues and whites mixing, hovering off the ground, maneuvering and repelling using their strong magnetic fields. Makers of the sentient, rulers of a society of creatures brought to life, an inorganic society that they alone are the creators of. Plasmic beings are ageless. They have no history of coming into being. Unable to reproduce themselves, they must stay content in the matriarchal ability to awaken new life. Not fragile and not hardy, and capable of dying, the plasmic creatures rule the life they evoke tightly. They are not unfew in numbers, but time is infinite, and they, as with all, like to see much more of it. If they die, they will bring with them into oblivion the spark of inorganic self-awareness. They are the originators and protectors of a unique circumstance. When willing, they can call forth new life from this inanimate world to live and serve. The hierarchy of inanimates, their division of labor and class structure, is about to get a new member. When surrounding an object with their bodies, overlapping their fields in the center for long periods, generate strange subatomic particles. Plasmic beings' mysterious origin come into play when their extremely strong electromagnetic fields cause an atomic ichor to form, a quantum spark of life, generating and holding tremendous electromagnetic fields and concentrating it for long enough gives it time to begin to manifest in the macro world from the micro. Cultivating it, the atomic ichor's quantum birth starts by interlocking and engulfing the rock's atoms, or any other material's atoms of the plasmic's choosing. Branching out from the quantum, past the molecular level, ribboning through the rock, growing into the macro world, veins of dark, dense, cryptic ooze fill the destitute matter, fertilizing a sterile, impotent wasteland with the help of the plasmic beings. The atomic ichor domesticates the macroscopic, veining its way through the barren, bringing life to the lifeless. A loud, straining sound increases from inside as the stress on the mighty boulder grows, as it develops and matures. Suddenly out of the boulder two giant limbs grow and extend, nubby ends smashing into the ground. 3 digits grow from the nubs, propelling itself up for leverage. Struggling and pulling its way free from the boulder, a humanoid figure emerges. A head clears the surface, out of the rock, as if it was sludge. Then a torso clears, and one leg lifts itself out of the boulder and steps its foot down. Then the other clears the rock. Made of smooth, somehow fresh-looking stone, the brutal stands for the first time. Numerous kinds of creatures of inanimate matter are brought to life like this, all having varying degrees of the same and different properties based on its material. Creatures made of hard, dense material serve as protectors and punishers, guards and reinforcers. Mineral monsters are given the most ethically questionable tasks. They are the boots on the ground, the soldiers on the streets, the ones following orders. The spectrum of physics that animate the inanimate, that inhabit the empty, are complicated and fantastical. Processes feeding off each other, levels emerging from seemingly, deceptively, nothing. Multifaceted physics at different levels of reality work in harmony to achieve awareness, to create consciousness. Sentient activation when a criterion has been met. Life made not of chemicals and electricity, or of organs and bacteria, but of strange physics, large and small, working in harmony, just like organic, evolved bodies, but yet both still just a container, a device for will. Surrounding Brutal, the Imperial's movements as they hover change from a gentle bobbing to erratic and agitated. The tension lies in the fact that plasma Imperials sometimes execute those blossoming from the bleak, as they call it, that are too strong. There is a danger to themselves, the galaxy, and possibly even the universe. Inanimates have varying levels of physical effects, some much more than others. Quickly Brutal developed his physics, the sign of their agitation, a sign of pending extremeness in powers. A soft, serene beginning with loose dirt, light pebbles among the grass lazily floats off the ground. Brutal's invisible force spreading out while getting stronger, collecting larger and ever larger debris that all slowly rise and move, spinning like orbiting bodies. Everything not gripped into the ground becomes suspended in air and slothfully rotates with Brutal at the center. Brutal's gravity vortex expands and strengthens too quickly. The plasma Imperials drop formation and retreat a distance. Meanwhile, suspended debris swirls slowly, casually, caught in unstoppable gravity, while Brutal, although standing, the stone beast is still mostly weary and unconscious from birthing. Debris spiraling inward in a gravitational vortex, hitting what would be the stone surface, rock flesh of Brutal, begins to disappear. Rubble pulled gently inward, cradled in Brutal's gravity, disintegrates on a thin, imperceptible horizon covering Brutal's body. It glides into nothing, vanishing layer by layer at the surface. One can imagine it continuing that way slowly into the center, somewhere, and that giant stone monster, instead of being obliterated forever. The unmistakable sound of plasmic humming approaches Brutal, electrifying the air with their killer intent. Waves of intense magnetism crash over Brutal's body. His electrons begin to slow down. Like a heart attack, weakness drops him to the ground, nausea overtakes him. Powerful magnetism is a weakness to all emerging inanimates, easily disrupting their newly forming bodies. Plasma Imperials have decided to kill Brutal, culling him at his most vulnerable, progressing faster than any inanimate before. They may have already waited too long. Down to one knee, hunched over, holding himself up, trying not to collapse, struggling for existence, his strength fading, he begins returning to nothingness. He experiences fear and panic. There is a realization of nothingness, of not being, and the possibility of going back to that forever. Debris drops, no longer floating, motionless, as lifeless as before, scattered around. Brutal collapses, splayed on the ground, his new senses fading. Lifting his head, he sees his creators blazing before him. Orange grass sways in the breeze between them. They see him as a tool, a lower life form, nothing more than survival, and ironically an artificial life form. These brutal beasts should be grateful in absoluteness for their consciousness, is the thinking of plasma Imperials. Intensifying, a deep hum collectively from the plasmas goes sub-bass. The air crackles with electricity. Plasma Imperials increase their magnetism, forcing more and more onto Brutal, but they have plateaued and can't handle the force of more magnetism because Brutal refuses to die. The Imperials are struggling dangerously to continue their flexing of magnetic forces, but making his way from the rear, the squadron leader approaches. The leader is taller, wider, and stronger than the regular Imperials, with a different type of magnetism from his different configuration as a plasmic being. He lends his help and makes Brutal hum and crackle from the inside. Passed on to all created inanimates, given from the original plasmic beings, they have the ability to communicate with each other. Brutal can now speak to the Imperials. Help is what he asks. Help of some type, not knowing the help he needs, being as an experientially blank as he is. The Imperials understood. They witnessed the suffering before the pleas. Everything is temporary but them. Coldness, a senselessness comes with eons of steadfastness and an ideology. Desensitized to the suffering and death of many before. An anger builds in the dishonor of being disobeyed, indignity of not dying, disrespect in his struggle. How does Brutal not sense their greatness and will, and simply concede his life? Structure must be maintained, order faithfully and fatally preserved. Hierarchy is their equity, extreme rigidity in a plasmic society. Lashing out in disgust by the continuous, laborious struggling from the dying creature, the squadron leader electrifies the air around him. Streaks of lightning tear across Brutal's body, gouging, mutilating his stone flesh. Brutal just lies there withered, cracking, crumbling, being flayed alive, with rock ripped out, pieces scattered around, atomic ichor oozing out. It was a delight, the experience in both cruelty and curiosity and infrequency for the Imperials. Killing another inanimate was rare, a stone one even rarer. Extermination is routine and mandatory in plasmic civilization, but that is mostly for sentient life, flesh and blood, evolved organics. They refuse to call culling of parasitic infections to their inanimate world worthy of the title systematic genocide. Loose debris lying around Brutal starts floating. Suddenly immense gravity swirls, tearing up vegetation, ripping trees from the ground, raising boulders. The thin, imperceptible horizon covering Brutal's body consumes ferociously again. A storm full of rubble swirls, trees and boulders smash into each other. As he lay dying, fading into nothing, he heard something. Maybe it was the atomic ichor that brought him to life. Maybe it was his imagination. But he had heard or experienced a faint whisper of encouragement, a whisper that his will to live was justified, a whisper of hopeful solidarity. With the darkness enclosing, the serene, dying peace inside Brutal's mind lay in stark contrast to the raging storm outside. More and more debris is ripped from the ground, swirling inward, forced into that boundary of oblivion. Smaller stone lumps ripped from the body reactivate and begins again devouring rubble. All the little pieces hum in resonation together, synchronizing in vibration from the storm invigorating the surface of Brutal's mangled chunks. Looking like a ravaged, fossilized carcass, unwilling to die, the Brutal, gathering all his new will, finds inside himself a spark, a quite literal chain reaction from levels deep inside. A blast of bright light, and Brutal, still prostrated, begins floating. Torn pieces of his body float too, and are pulled in. Reaching the body again, they seem to just merge. What was once smooth and unblemished stone now looks patched together, carved like bark, etched and aged like a weathered tree. Brutal awakens, sets his feet on the ground and stands erect. His visual senses energize, and he can see. Green sky, orange grass, blue and white plasmic beings. Auditory senses can hear the buzzing and humming of the plasmic Imperials, along with the gravitational storm. Not knowing what to make of the uncommunicative beings in front of him, who refused his pleas for help and tried to murder him, Brutal swings his long, massive arm through the plasmic beings. Although they look formed of blue and white fire, these beings don't interact directly with the world, only through their electromagnetic effects. So Brutal's arm goes right through them. The singularity covering him isn't strong enough to affect their almost ethereal bodies, nor his gravitational effect strong enough to suck them in. Attempting to demagnetize Brutal, his atoms twist and distort in the squadron leader's last effort to kill him. Brutal's body begins to glow red hot, radiating heat and light from all the energy being released from the forced, unnatural deformation of his atoms. Soon, all the contorting and straining energy will snap, and in a burst of demagnetization render him dead. Brutal has no idea how to resist this torturous burning, this unstoppable inner pain. He is literally blazing alight like lava. He is becoming soft, melting in agony, and again helpless. Though in spite of all this, Brutal's swirling gravitational vortex keeps growing. Despite the plasmic attempts, a giant storm, a hurricane of rubble, smashes all around them. The plasma Imperials are engulfed. An eerie hollow wind echoes out from the singularity covering Brutal's body. As the debris hits the surface, it spews like a quasar, a massive amount of white light and energy and extra material. The ground around Brutal is being torn away. With Brutal in the center, at the eye of the storm, it lacerates the planet, exposing millions of years of layers. The planet is slowly being strip-mined and vanishing. This walking sphere of gravity, this living black hole, turns half the planet into an open pit. One side of the planet swirls around Brutal, just a tiny dot in the center. Consuming, devouring an entire planet, it swirls down into Brutal, who devours every last little thing. Plasma Imperials and all. It was too much for even them. Never has an entire squadron of Plasma Imperials been taken out at once, let alone by a single individual, in the eons they can remember. He will bring fear to many. Brutal's stone body, rock flesh hardens, stiffens and cools as he drifts unconscious in cold, empty space, awakening in a room with shimmering, vibrating walls. A dark, diamond-shaped hole in the center of one wall. There is something moving towards him. Through the hole, a giant, winged, plasmic being flies through and orders Brutal to call him the Plasma Sovereign. The end. Where it goes, The Epilogue. Eventually, Brutal destroys Plasmic Society, killing the Plasma Sovereign and taking his place, earning the title the Brutal of Inanimates. He learns to continue to bring more inanimates into this world his own way, and no longer wars or genocides organic creatures.